But apart from memory, there are a few other aspects to cognition. There is thinking, how we think, what we think, you know, what's the speed of our thinking, how we develop our thinking. And then there is another aspect, which is perception. Perception is of various kinds. We normally perceive in terms of, our five senses. But the aspect that I will be interested in is visual perception. So that's going to be a major part of the presentation today, visual perception. All these cognitive faculties, our memory, our thinking, our perception, helps us to communicate in big and small ways. So we first deal with the first one, which is memory. Now, when we say memory, right, many things can come to our minds. When we say memory, what happens is that we often hear things like, oh, somebody has a great memory. They are able to remember and learn whatever they see. So we've often heard terms like photographic memory. You see something and you remember it, right? Sometimes we talk about memory in terms of, memory loss. People losing their minds. They do not remember events of their lives, past events of their lives. They cannot recognize other people. They cannot remember names and things like that. So memory pretty much, in fact, we say that memory pretty much is a fundamental aspect of our existence. Whatever we know about ourselves, our childhood, our adulthood, our youth, is all made up of memory. In fact, when we have midlife crisis, okay, this is again a phenomena in psychology, which is often discussed. People look back at their lives and gauge and try to assess what they've gained and what they've lost, metaphorically. So what comes to use? Memory. Whatever flashes they have in mind about what happened to them, the positive experiences, the negative experiences. So memory is a huge part of our cognition. It helps us to remember things. It helps us to recognize, and it helps us in everyday activities, to process things on a daily basis, to understand the environment. But one of the basic things in memory is, we should remember, memory is dependent upon attention to particular stimuli. So when I say attention to stimuli, what I mean is, how much focus are you giving to something in the environment? It can be words, it can be an image, right? Which is in psychology is known as an icon. It can be an auditory image, which is known as an echo. Like right now, when I'm speaking, it's psychologists would say that if somebody is paying attention to what I'm saying, it is auditory attention in the form of an echo. So there are multiple ways in which there is visual attention in the form of words. There is also visual attention in the form of images, which are called icons. So our memory is largely dependent upon the attention that we give to a particular stimulus or stimuli in the environment. And nowadays, you all will notice that nowadays, since there is so much, again, digitalization, there is so much on social media, there is so much information that we actually use the term information overload. We are being bombarded with information of all types, So it's actually a little hard to focus. It's hard to focus on what is more important, what is less important. What should I give priority to? What shouldn't I give priority to, right? So here what comes in handy is attention. What we pay attention to can potentially become part of our memory. Okay. What we pay fleeting attention to may or may not be part of our memory. How does memory work? Once we've given attention to something, okay, how does memory work? if we give attention to something for about 10 to 30 seconds, right, half a minute till about that time, information can be stored in our working memory or something which is known as short-term memory. And only if that information is extremely relevant will it be stored for a longer period of time. Anything which is beyond 30 seconds is clubbed under the term of long-term memory. So whatever we know as, birthdays of people, anniversaries of people, certain things we might remember from our past, certain things we might remember from academics, okay? Some particular kinds of information that we have given attention to, all that becomes part of our long-term memory, whatever we've remembered. And then if it becomes part of long-term memory, we tend to remember it pretty much for an extended period of time, maybe even a lifetime, right? But the interesting thing is, and here is what, is a small little practical suggestion. As teachers in academics, we often are made to believe a small thing. A child who is able to memorize things correctly and reproduce them on paper, right, is known as a good student. Why? Because they remember everything. They remember everything that was taught to them. But this criteria, I believe, should be changed. Why? Because we are measuring a person's intelligence and academic ability solely on the basis of memory. This should not happen. So a small thing that I often do, to know about people's short-term and long-term memories is, for long-term memory, you can talk to the students, ask them what's important to them, what they remember. For short-term memory, there is a small experiment, okay, in psychology, which I often practice with the students. And that is, I might give them digits, some numbers. For example, a 5-digit number. And I ask them to write it on paper. And I tell them, fold the paper. Then I make it a 6-digit number. I add one more digit, right? Then I make it a 7-digit number, an 8-digit number. I keep increasing the numbers, right? Till a particular point, till they've done it, let's say 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, this particular exercise. And then I ask them, let's find out how many of you actually remembered the numbers. We can do it with numbers, we can do it with words, we can do it with whatever. Right? So it's on basis of this that I always tell them that you might have good memory, that is great. Even if you don't have good memory, memory should not be the sole basis or the sole yardstick for deciding your academic intelligence. Why? Because somebody might be very good at thinking. Somebody might be very good at processing information, at analyzing, but they might not be very good at memory. Memory is helpful, but what I'm trying to say is it should not be the sole basis for our educational assessment, okay, which it normally is many a times. The next thing that I want to discuss with you all is a concept which is related to memory, which is called memory and forgetting, right? This has been discussed by psychologists, primarily people like Ebbinghauss, right? In fact, in psychology, we have a term called Ebbinghauss's curve, which basically in simple words says that if information is given to us right now, if after this particular lecture, somebody asks you to point out, what was spoken in the lecture, because of the immediacy of the situation, because of the recency of the situation, right, or the lecture, you will remember the information. But if I ask you the same information, maybe after 2 days, you'll remember a little less. If I ask you after some more days, maybe a week, you'll remember a little less. So the idea is, in forgetting is, we tend to forget information that is not available to us on a daily basis. Until and unless it's extremely important and we've learned it up, then it's in our long-term memory. So, but all kinds of information is not relevant to us, and all kinds of information cannot be part of our long-term memory. So forgetting is a natural process. We tend to forget information that is not recent, right? And I'm sure for all of us, this curve of forgetting, or this curve of remembering, right, is separate. Separate in the sense that all of us have our own ways of remembering, and all of us have our own ways of forgetting information, and what we remember, what we forget, okay, or the rate at which we remember, the rate at which we forget. But the important point to learn from this is, from forgetting, is that because forgetting happens, memory becomes important and retrieval of information becomes extremely important. So 2-3 ways in which we can remember information, 2-3 ways in which we can retrieve information are these psychologically. First is a concept which is known as mnemonics. Mnemonics means, if suppose we have 20 points to a concept, right? Or 15 points to a concept, 15 features or 15 points or something like that, right? It's always better to club them under particular sections, right? So what we normally do in mnemonics is, let's say if we have 15 points, we will create a name, a particular name, right? And where each alphabet, okay, stands for one or two particular points. Now, when we don't need to remember those 15 points separately, all we need to remember is, we need to remember that particular name. So let's say if I am it's a history class, and there are certain dates, certain events I need to remember. So I make a mnemonic for a particular word. I create my own word for it, okay, like ABCJFG, something like that. A stands for 2 points, B stands for 2 points, and things like that. What's going to happen is, I don't have to remember the points separately. I need to remember this particular mnemonic, A, B, C, G, F, G. And when I remember the mnemonic, I will gradually get the points back in my mind. This helps students who are not very good at remembering information, or who find it difficult to remember information. Difficult for me. It's difficult. Why? Because we've not simplified it. If we simplify it for the student, they will remember it, because it's an easy process, right? So that's one way of retrieving information and not forgetting, okay? Uh, the second way is, in memory is, the second is by something which is known as, location retrieval cues. That is, the way and the environment in which somebody learnt up the information. Forget learning up also. Learning is a higher order process. Even reading the information, the way somebody, the environment in which somebody read the information, if the person is able to recreate that same environment, it'll help them to understand and to memorize and to learn, or to retrieve the information. So let's put it this way, something as small and trivial as this, that if somebody was sitting and reading a science chapter, and they were having a cup of tea sitting in their room, chances are, sitting in one corner of the room, chances are they should actually, when they're rereading the science chapter, go and sit in that same corner of the room and have a cup of tea. Psychologists say it just might help us to retrieve that information if we've forgotten it, or it might just help us to understand the information better. So retrieval becomes very important, right? Because memory is directly correlated to learning, fortunately or unfortunately, it is, right? But here we may need to make a distinction between two kinds of learning. One is rote learning, right, where children just remember everything and reproduce the information as if they're regurgitating it, right? And in the educational setup, those children are considered very, very bright and brilliant. Why? Because they've remembered everything and written it down on paper. And the second kind is non-rote learning, where we process, think, analyze, grasp the information, and then write it in our own words. So our work as teachers should always be to motivate students to, if they can, to motivate students to move in the direction of non-rote learning. Why? Because if they do not mug it up, so to say, they don't learn it by heart, okay, chances are they will remember because they've understood it and then they've remembered. And one way of understanding is what I've just talked about is mnemonics. Another way is, creating that same location or creating, being in that same environment, doing similar things when they were reading it for the first time. Right? Another thing which becomes important in memory is, which we should know, which can help us to communicate, okay, is apart from memory being long term and short term, we can have memory for particular skills and episodes, like certain episodes in our lives. All of us will remember, very, very distinctly, clearly. We can also have memory for skills, like driving is a skill. We've practiced it again and again and again, right? But we can also have something which is known as encyclopedic memory. Encyclopedic memory means what? Encyclopedic memory means that I have information, extensive information about a lot of topics, right? And sometimes this becomes useful for students. So we should actually train students and tell them something as simple as this. Do you need to go in depth into a particular subject, study it in detail, right? Like we do in research, PhD or MPhil, right? Or do you need to know extensively, do know about a lot of topics, right? But at a, let's say at a base level, not too much in depth, right? So we as teachers, we need to be aware of both short-term, long-term memory. We need to be aware of what is involved, what is relevant for our students, whether it's, they require memory for skills or do they require encyclopedic knowledge. What are the ways it is normal to forget? What are the ways in which they can remember or recall information? All this becomes extremely important. Why? Because it helps us in two ways as teachers, or if we are working in an organization. One, coming back to the point on empathy, if people forget, we would be empathetic. We would not be negative or unnecessarily critical about it or harsh about it. And secondly, we can actually have tips to help the person, right?
Right,
Another point,
right, right.
another point that I wanted to make before going on to something else, right, in cognition was, one small point was, uh, we all remember that the brain is wired in such a way that the neurons in the brain are connected, they are interconnected. It is not like, one part of the brain is not connected with the other part. They are totally connected. So one way of building our memory circuit, so to say, is through constant practice. And constant practice does not mean, many a times we hear people say this, that, I sat for 7 hours, 12 hours to study. Not really relevant. What is relevant is you might sit for 15 minutes, but give undivided attention. Because remember, that's the first thing I said about memory. Memory begins with attention. So if we give undivided attention to something, even for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, we have created an impression in the mind. We just need to practice that, and the memory will become stronger. From memory, we now move on to thinking. Okay, how we think. So, thinking, the first thing that I'd like to say about thinking is, the speed of thinking per se. We can think slowly. We can think very fast also. Uh, it's always better to think a little slowly. Why? Because slow does not mean, I do not mean the speed of a tortoise. I don't mean that. But slow means you're thinking, you're analyzing, you're understanding, and then moving on to the next concept. There are many times when we come across people who say that, I think very fast. The problem with that is, even though it can be appreciated, right? The problem with that is that if you're thinking too fast, your thinking might be jumbled. Thinking might be haywire. It might be a little disorganized. Why? Because we're jumping from one concept to another, to another, to another. So it's from one thought process to another and to another and to another, right? So thinking a little slow, taking time to think, taking time to absorb information is always better, because it helps us to develop cognitively. It helps us to think in a balanced way, in a rational way, right? Now, that's the speed in which we can think. But here, I'll be talking about, apart from speed, I'll be talking about thought content. What is it that we can think, and how is it that it can help us to communicate better? So the first thing in thinking is, right, in thought content, is concepts. We think in terms of concepts, right? Uh, Concepts about anything and everything. For example, right from our childhood, we have learned information in terms of concepts, information about people. You know, these are our parents, our siblings, our grandparents, right? Information about objects, right, or things in the world. This is a car, this is a toy, okay, this is a table, this is a chair, right? Or information about animals, a dog, a cat, an elephant, a giraffe. All these are concepts in our minds. And how do these concepts develop? These concepts develop in a hierarchical manner. You know, what we in again in research call as conceptual hierarchies. And conceptual hierarchies are very, very important, not just in language acquisition, in the way a child learns a language, but also in everyday living. Why? Because let's look at it this way, a small example. Uh, to a small child, if we introduce the concept of a dog, right? Normally we'll point out to the dog and say, look here, this is a doggy. And we have a particular way of speaking to children, right? Look here, this is a doggy. This is what is a doggy. What is it? And we'll keep repeating. Okay? Right? It is only when the child is able to recognize that we actually say that, there are introduce the child to different types of dogs. That here is a German Shepherd, and here is an Alsatian, and here is a Labrador, and things like that. Okay? So the hierarchy is this. We have the concept of animal. Under animals, you can have many animals, but dog is an animal. And under dog, you have types of dogs. This hierarchy is pretty much there in all the information that we remember. In science, we see this very often. You have a phenomena, you'll have a definition for it, and then you'll have its subtypes, right? So as teachers, this becomes important for us. This is the way concepts are arranged. They are arranged in particular ways and patterns. And when I say ways and patterns, what I mean by this is conceptual hierarchies. Why? Because why does this become important to us as teachers? When we know this, right, there are two things. We can, while teaching, arrange the information in a hierarchical manner. Simplify it and arrange it hierarchically so that it becomes helpful for the student to learn. Okay. Design it in the form of a flow chart. Okay. Or if not, use the chalk and blackboard method to explain it or to discuss it. If not that, just explain it in terms of, there are 3 levels or there are 2 levels, right? Because like I pointed out, in today's day and age, especially during the times of the pandemic, it becomes extremely important to simplify the information for the student. The information the student already has. In fact, they can download all the books and get all the information. We are the human element to point out and explain and be the bridge, the link between the student and the information. So conceptual hierarchies help us to understand that information is organized in hierarchies, and we can do that to help our own students. Another thing that's there in conceptual hierarchies, okay, uh, is we learn through definitions, or through something which is known again in technical language known as ostensive definitions. This means we learn through pointing out, through here and now. The example that I gave of the child is shown a doggy and said, "This is a doggy," right? So for information that can be pointed out, that is here and now, it's easy. For information that is not, we need to well hierarchically arrange it, right, for our students. Apart from this, okay, a typical way of thinking or understanding is called prototypes. Prototypes are also come under concepts, but prototypes are, let's say, a specific kind of concept, right? Prototypes actually mean when we are talking about the typical member of a group, right? That will have typical characteristics. So again, uh, we can have a prototype of a chair. A chair will be, like a plastic chair or a wooden chair, that has four legs, right? uh, a bean bag is also a kind of a chair, something that we sit on or recline on, okay, but it's not a prototype. Similarly, a rocking chair is not a prototype of a chair, because all chairs are not rocking chairs, right? So one very useful way of teaching children information is providing them prototypes, telling them that this is the information and this is the typical example for it. This is the way it is arranged. They will think faster. They will understand things faster. They will grasp things faster, right? So that is concepts, and that is prototypes. One more way of thinking, okay, is through something which is written here as mental constructions that are relevant in understanding the world, right? These mental constructions are called schemas, okay? Like we have a scheme or a plan. Similarly, we have a schema, right? And schemas were studied by, originally they were studied by someone called Frederick Bartlett in 1932, when he was studying, the trauma of war patients, what they remembered, right? But from there, from the 1930s, the research on schema has obviously progressed and expanded. And now we know that we can have these constructions about people, about events, even about texts, books, texts that we read, right? So, I'll give you a typical example and then I'll explain how they can be relevant in teaching, right? Uh, One of the things that I often do in my class is, if it's a new batch, I will always ask them this question, what do you think a teacher is? Or what do you think a teacher should be? A good teacher, right? And then they'll tell me all kinds of qualities and this and that, etc., etc. And then I'll tell them, this is your schema about teaching, right? And then I'll ask them, what do you think teachers are actually? So then they'll tell me, nowadays teachers are this, they do that. So I tell them, this is your schema about what teachers are actually. Right? So you have two sets of schemas, right? And then I will tell them, schematic constructions are very good at grasping information. Help us in understanding the environment. Why? Because we have schemas, consciously or subconsciously, about people. How a teacher is, how a doctor is, how a parent is, right? We also have schemas about events, right, which that are known as scripts. These are schemas where we are, for example, we go to a restaurant, okay? We have a schema of what is going to happen in the restaurant. We will go, sit, talk, look at the menu, order food. The waiter is going to take the order. It's going to take some time. Then the food's going to come. Once the food comes, we eat, uh, and we pay the bill, and then we go home, right? This is an event schema. Right? Now, once we ourselves know what a schema is, right, we can help our students to learn the information that is in the text better. Why? Because we can arrange it and tell them that, this information is about a person, this information is about this process. Remember, there are 4 points in this process: A, B, C, D. This information is about an event or a phenomena. Remember, this is how it happened. It has particular stages or particular steps, right? And we can always give examples to students that are relatable. Relatable means things that they understand, things that they can relate to, things for which they already have a schema, right? So one thing that I sometimes do, again, okay, in my classes is this. if I have to teach them a new concept, okay, about let's say I have to teach them a new concept or a new something about a new author or something, I will try and first talk about something that they already know. I have to teach them B. I try and talk to them about A, something that they already know. And then I say, okay, now you know A, this is B. It's somewhat similar to this, right? These are the things in concept B, right? So they can be related, A and B can be related. And these are the points of differences. So things become faster. Things become faster. Why? Because I do not start off by saying that, here is the information. B is about this, and this. I don't say that. I start off with a relatable concept. I start off with a schema that they already are aware of. So schemas are quite helpful in knowing, right? Another way in which schemas can help us, for example, if we can have, text schemas. Text schemas would be, very, very common in writing, in fiction or in non-fiction. We know what every genre is about, right? For example, we know what a typical film, would contain. A typical, let's say, action film or a typical horror film. What will be the ingredients? Okay. So if I give them an essay on that to read, let's say a horror film, okay, or something about an action film, they already have the schema in their mind, so they'll be able to read faster. But if I give them something new, something, let's say, about another country, something for which they don't have a schema, let's say I give them something about Red Indians, Native Americans, right? Right? The people who lived and have now been, well, reduced to a minority in the United States, right? They are not. I cannot expect the students to know about those people and about that culture. So before I give them something to read, I actually tell them that this is how these people lived, this is what happened to them, this is how they ate, these were their customs, this was their culture. So what am I doing? Actually, I am building their schema, or I'm building their concepts. Okay, and then I give them the text about it. So one typical way of helping students learn information to process things cognitively is, the best way is, before giving the text, before actually coming to the technical concept, okay, it's better to talk about the concept a little bit, give a background to it. In any subject, it might be geography, it might be history, it might be science, right? We can always relate. In science, schemas become very relevant. Why? We can always talk about concepts and things that the students know, that are similar or dissimilar, right? Something that they can relate to, okay? And then go on to the actual technical concept. So this is how thinking can be arranged in concepts, is arranged in concepts. Concepts can be prototypical, right? And we also have schematic constructions to help us to communicate, to help us to read, write, speak. Not only are they helping us, but they are also helping our students, because ultimately the students are, if you see in all this, in memory and in thinking, we are speaking, the students are listening, right? It'll help them to read, maybe it'll help them to write whenever they write. So somewhere or the other, basic communication skills are getting involved with these small practices, you can say cognitive practices. The next one is something which is, I had discussed, as perception. And perception, I had said, is of various types, right? We perceive through our five senses. But one of the points that I've written below is, we perceive information through hearing, in the auditory manner, right? Uh, that is there, truly there, right? We can, okay? But the strongest form of perception is visual perception, right? We might hear, we might not hear, okay, but vision is something which is very dominant. We will always see, even if it is for a second. And the simplest example of this is, when you are going on the road and there is traffic, right, and there are public announcements being made, right, how many of us will actually listen to the public announcement? Not really. But if there's a huge hoarding or poster, for a second, that can catch our attention. So when it comes to, let's say a competition between hearing and vision, the auditory perception and visual perception usually wins hands down. So visual perception is a very important, let's say, faculty in communicating, right? And it helps us directly in reading and in writing. Directly in reading and then obviously in writing, right? Why? Because we can train ourselves, our own selves, and even our students. And when we're working in a team, in an organization, we can help others also through particular strategies, particular reading strategies. Let's put it this way. These strategies are things like this. Depending on the goal, depending on the aim of what kind of information is wanted, depending on what we have to do, we can read, right? For example, if we are looking for specific information and there are like 50 pages, we don't have to go through the 50 pages line by line. We can just skim. Look for particular information, right? Another way of doing this is, again, let's say we have a talk or a presentation tomorrow, and again we have 50 pages, right? And we don't have the time to go through all of that. We don't want specific information, but we want an overall understanding of how things are going. So look at the first page quickly, second page, third page, look at the last 2-3 pages. Okay, look at something that's given in the in the middle, let's say at the 20th page or the 22nd page, something. So you'll get a general idea. Look at the headings only. So you've scanned the whole document, you've kind of seen it, but you've not read it in great detail, right? So looking for specific information is one strategy, right? Looking for scanning the entire document, going through it, not in great detail, but in a cursory manner is another strategy. So they're scanning, they're skimming. Apart from that, there is another one. Okay, the more we read, the more we have the ability to predict. Oh, this is what is given. We know what's going to follow. There can be only 2-3 options there. Okay, like we can predict what's going to happen. Typically, what's going to happen in a film. Oh, now this is happening. Now I'm sure this is what's going to happen to the hero, or this is what is going to happen to the heroine. Like we can predict that. We can also predict information, as in academic information, what's going to happen there. Okay, but prediction, our skill of prediction, okay, is increases with visual perception, increases with more reading, more practice in reading. Right. So there are particular ways in which we can read, and there are particular ways in which we can help our students to read. We can actually tell them that this is what you have to do. You want to prepare for a viva, do this. If you don't have so much time, you want to prepare for a presentation, you can do this. Okay. Also, apart from this, another way in which we can help our students communicate cognitively is helping them understand the difference between reading fast or reading slow, right? Which basically means what I'm going to talk about is speed reading or silent reading, right? Often we say, if you're speed reading, you are reading several words per minute. Several words, okay? Normally you can read about, I think, I'm not giving the exact figure, just an approximate, maybe about, 70, 80 words per minute, 60, 70, 80 words per minute, maybe a little more. But if you're reading fast, you're reading like much more. You're reading many words per minute, 120, 130 words per minute, maybe 140, 50 words per minute. Okay. And I'm giving a conservative figure. The figures can be higher, right? The actual figures can be much higher, right? Because this is a rough estimate that I'm giving. Yeah. So the question is speed reading relevant for our students? Is speed reading relevant for us? It can be relevant. It can be, right? But the idea is when we are speed reading, we should always remember that we need to aim for global understanding. Global understanding means we need to aim for what is in the text. If somebody asks us what's in the text, we should be able to say this is in the text. If we cannot say that, then speed reading is becoming useless. So for ourselves, we should be able to gauge that if in a minute, we've read one page, okay, or more than a page, and then you can close the book and then ask yourselves, do you know what's actually happening in that one page or 1.5 page? If you know it, then it's helping you. Then please continue. If you don't, then read slower. And this is how we should tell our students that it is fine. Somebody can read fast, somebody can read slow, whatever it is, as long as they're aiming for global understanding, for overall understanding of a text. Another thing is, in contrast to speed reading, is something which we call as silent reading. Silent reading is quite helpful, right? But for silent reading, we need, concepts, a few things like this. For example, silent reading will be enhanced if we do not have distractions in the environment, external factors. If you don't have noise, proper ventilation, proper lighting, and things like that. Okay. Silent reading, some people are naturally silent readers. They would tend to read a text silently to themselves, while some others are naturally loud readers. They're reading aloud. They tend to remember information and they read things aloud. Okay. Some students are oral performers. They will listen to what you're saying, right? Once they've heard it, listen to it, okay, they will remember the information, right? While some of them are kinetic. Kinetic means they will tend to write down that information. So depending on what our student is, okay, we should allow them to be that. We should allow for that kind of flexibility. People learn through hearing, they learn through writing, they learn through reading aloud, they can, or speed reading, they can learn through silent reading, whatever suits them, as long as it is helping them, right? So that is the bit on visual perception. When it comes to the bit on auditory perception, I had said auditory perception comes, a tad behind, a little behind visual perception. Okay, like I just pointed out right now, some of our students can be auditory performers. That means they tend to hear and understand the concept, right? So that is also one way of one way of learning information. But one small tip is, if somebody is into silent reading or reading aloud or writing, or being in, somebody who is engaged in auditory perception, hearing and then learning information, right? Like I pointed out, that we should allow them to follow what they are comfortable with, but at the same time we should also introduce them to the other aspect. Somebody who's reading slowly, we can also say, why don't you, when you're reading slowly, why don't you try to write some of the information down, or why don't you once say the whole thing aloud to yourself? Why do we do this? In a very simple way, why do we do this? Okay. Why? Because the brain is created in such a way that the more senses you use for communicating, the faster you are able to memorize, and the faster you're able to communicate, the better you're able to communicate. Let's put it this way. So if you are interested in silent reading, you should also be able to use your hands and write the information and read that information aloud once. So you're hearing the information. So what you've done is, you're not only using your eyes, but you've used your hands, tactile, right? Perception, and you've also used speech, hearing. Whatever you're saying, you're hearing. So the more senses you use, the better you are at cognitively grasping the information. And the better you are at grasping the information, the better you will be able to communicate it. You might have to say it, you might have to read it, you might have to write it, whatever it is, right? So we need to tell our students that the brain functions in such a way that the more you practice, the more senses you use, the more there is interconnection in the brain, the faster you will remember the information, the more enhanced will be your learning, right? And for a longer period of time, you will remember that information. Okay. But again, like I said, memory, thinking, and perception obviously includes understanding. Here I'm not talking about rote learning, right? Because I'm not a big proponent of rote learning, because when in rote learning, students just regurgitate the information. What I'm talking about is meaningful, authentic, learning that is based on understanding concepts, understanding the information. Right? In things like that, our perception helps, the faculty of perception helps, the faculty of memorizing, looking at the information, hearing it, speaking it, reading it helps, and obviously knowing the concept, understanding the concept helps. Right? So now we will talk about some particular strategies to boost our communication through our cognitive abilities. The first one that I mentioned is called multitasking, right? And the answer to this is no, right? A lot of people will say, oh, I'm a great multitasker. Well, you are deficient at learning and at communication if you're a great multitasker. Why? Because there is a word that we have, right? A word in our Indian languages, right? In Sanskrit and Hindi, which is known as ekagrachit. Ekagrachit means one-pointedness. Whatever we are doing, we should do it with one-pointed attention. We'll do it quicker, and we'll do it with more depth and more understanding. So multitasking is a big no-no, right? If you want to function to the best of our abilities, if we want to be productive, we should not multitask. We should actually do one task at a time, right? For one small example I can give you, people will say, I listen to, again, this is an example from students, I work best, ma'am, when, I'm writing something and I'm listening to music, So my answer to them is, you're writing, neither are you paying full attention to the writing, nor are you paying full attention to your music. So you are actually somewhere listening to the music and somewhere paying attention to the writing. It's much better if you can actually just listen to the music, listen to one song, two songs, put it down, and then focus on the writing. So multitasking is not a great idea. One-pointedness, one tasking is very good for our cognition and for communication. The second point is something that I've emphasized a little before, that is global understanding. For everything, we should aim for a global understanding. Global understanding means an overall understanding of information or the text, right? We can also aim for, specific understanding specific points under it, remembering them, rightly so. Okay, but I can give you research on memory. Okay, research done by researchers like Lombardi et al. Okay, they pointed out and they have shown that participants in the experiment remembered the summary of the information, but they did not remember the exact form. They did not remember the information verbatim. So they were given some kind of information. They were asked to remember it for some period of time. They were given a distractor task or, a gap in between. And then after that, they were again asked the same information. And what was reported was that they remembered the gist of it, the summary of it, but they did not remember it verbatim. So summary means you're aiming for a global understanding. So normally what I do with my students is I always tell them that, this is the topic and these are some of the basic points. Basic points means this is the basic gist, the basic summary of the topic. After this, you can get into the nitty-gritty of it. And I will explain the nitty-gritty also to you all. Okay. And the material is also given to you. But please remember the summary first. What is it about? If you remember that, you will automatically be able to read the text, right? That doesn't mean that, as teachers, we're not there to clarify their doubts or to, point out specific features in the text or points. That is there. But the basic point is, if somebody is good at summarizing, they are using their cognitive ability in the right direction, because they are able to aim for a global understanding. They are able to understand the text in an overall manner. The next strategy is understanding our target audience and the age. And this is needless to say, obviously we do, especially if we are speaking or when we are writing. Because if we don't know the audience and we don't know their background, in terms of their age or whatever, or their professional qualification or some little bit of information, okay, we would not know how to, let's say, how to present the information, how to provide them what would be the the most important or most relevant for them. Another one is memory boosting strategies. I've talked about mnemonics already. The next one is something which is known as inferencing. Inferencing means, again, okay, here we need this ability in our education system. It is not, it's quite lacking actually. Okay, why? Because like I pointed out, we tend to, in our educational system, we tend to point out and say that, oh, somebody who remembers all the information is a very good learner. No, somebody who is able to analyze, somebody who is able to infer, somebody is able to understand things that are not directly stated are good at learning. For example, you've taught your students a particular topic. Now, there are two ways in which you can ask them a question. You can ask them a direct question, or you can ask about the same information indirectly. The ones who are able to indirectly answer the questions that you've asked indirectly are much better at learning, and they're actually intelligent. Why? Because they have understood the topic in such a way that whether you ask them A or B or Z or whatever about the topic, they will be able to answer. Whereas somebody who's just rote learned, they will get flummoxed if you ask them an indirect inferential question, because they do not have the ability to think. They would be like, this was not in the course, this was not in the syllabus. So one thing as teachers we should aim for, in terms of cognition and in terms of communication, is teaching our children inferencing abilities, teaching them to understand a text in multiple ways and to answer the question in multiple ways. Not just be straight, have a straight jacketed way of thinking and performing in the exams. That's not being intelligent, right? That's not using our cognitive faculty to its optimal level. Another way in which you can help communication and cognition is through something which is called association building. This is very good for developing vocabulary. This is also very good for developing, our general understanding of a topic. So if I let's say I want to teach in medical sciences, I want to teach something about blood. Okay, it's the circulatory system. Okay, I give them the word blood, and I ask them, what comes to your mind? Tell me. So they'll say multiple things, blood, hemoglobin, blood, anemia. They might say blood circulatory system. Okay, they might say blood can be related to cancer, blood related to multiple things. So at the end of it, I have many words to that particular one word. I've built an association, right? And then I start teaching. Then I say that, this, all these connections will help us understand the concept of blood and how it's there in the medical sciences, how it's there, what kind of diseases are caused, what can be the etiology for it, what is the pathology for it, and what all, when we say blood, what all actually is subsumed under it. Okay, the broad concept of blood. Okay, so association building becomes very important. One example that I can give from English in association building is, I give you a word and I ask you what comes to your mind. So they'll give me related words. Okay, they can give me synonyms, they can give me antonyms, they can give me something that they remember that's relevant for them. Either ways, if I am building an association and I'm talking to them about words through association, chances are, if they do not remember all the associations, they'll remember at least one or two. And that is the most important thing. Why? Because we tend to remember things where our associations are stronger. In fact, all of cognition is about association building, building an association about, with that particular information, either by reading it or by speaking it aloud, okay, or by doing it silently or by writing it down, whatever it is. So all of learning is association building. Okay. Another skill that I'd like to point out is again related to association building, is something which is known as mind mapping. Something which has been quite popularized in the new version of the new series of Sherlock Holmes. Okay, where the detective Sherlock Holmes gets into his mind palace to solve particular crimes. Now, mind palace means how you've arranged that information mentally. So we as learners, cognitively, all of us are learners because we're always learning something or the other at some point in our lives. We as learners cognitively will not forget the information, or will tend to remember the information faster if we have associated it and created a mind palace for it. Like, this particular quality is related to this. or this information is related to something else, right? If we draw those relationships, we draw those associations in our mind, we will tend to remember faster. If especially we draw associations about new information to already existing information in our mind, information that we already know. If we do that, we would tend to remember the new information. Why? Because we're linking it to information that we already know, information that we are already familiar with, right? And the next one is something which we call as critical reasoning or critical thinking, right? And this can be related to inferencing here, right? Why? Because when we say critical reasoning and critical thinking, it means the ability to not understand things in terms of its face value, in terms of what is given on the surface, but in terms of multiple layers of meanings, in terms of, why is this information given? What does the author mean by this? What is the author trying to say? Is there some kind of a contrast in this text? Can I link it to previous information that I know? Can I question the author? Whatever the author is saying, I do not agree with. Do I have my own reasons for saying that, I do not agree with what the author is saying? So basically, thinking in terms of critical reasoning obviously requires critical thinking, but critical thinking in terms of what? In terms of reasoning, in terms of challenging the information, in terms of questioning the information, in terms of understanding the background of the information, why the information is given, why something is given and something else is not given. That is critical thinking. And in the West, obviously we have proponents for critical thinking like Paulo Freire and Ira Shaw, right? But and there's a huge pedagogy that is based on it, critical pedagogy. But in our everyday classrooms, we are, as teachers, we are limited by time and space. There's syllabus to be completed, there are other administrative work duties that we have to perform, etc., etc. So my attempt would be to say that we should introduce critical reasoning and thinking in our classrooms, right? And teach our chapters according to that. But even if we can't do it, we should teach our students to think critically, to reason that they are given with, that they are presented with, because that helps us to think, right? It helps us, it's using our minds, it's using our brains to discuss it, it's using our speech, it's using our hearing, right? And even to write down their points for or against it, right? Here again we are using our hands, kinetic movements, right? So there are multiple faculties, multiple cognitive faculties that are being used there. So these are some of the you can say some of the ways in which we can boost learning or cognition or thinking. And now if anybody has certain questions or certain suggestions, they can open. The floor is open.
Yes, anybody wants to ask questions? No, ma'am. No, ma'am is the answer. No, no, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a wonderful session, madam. Thank you so much. And what is why we have gone for communication is that the communication plays a major role in emotional intelligence. By the way.
Yes. In fact, sir, I can expand on this and say it this way. If one of the basic things in emotional intelligence is using our cognition, how we think,
Yes.
how we can use our mind, and ultimately our emotional intelligence and our cognition is fundamental to communication. We can't communicate if we are not empathetic. We cannot communicate if we do not use our cognition properly. If we cannot have a proper sense of memory, we cannot think properly, we cannot read or understand things visually, we will not be able to communicate. All of emotional intelligence is about communication. Because we are not, if I can say this, there is a poet in English called Matthew Arnold, a Victorian poet, right? And if I quote him, I'll say that no man is an island unto himself. We are all interconnected. So we are all interconnected through communication, some form of the other of communication, verbal or non-verbal communication. So all our emotional intelligence becomes better. We as individuals become better if we are able to communicate.
That's what. No, I'm very happy to see that, and most of them they're speaking is a very nice session, by the way, because what I'm talking about. The connection is important, and the connection is failing, and that leads to lot many problems in emotional EQ or IQ or whatever you call it, EI or otherwise. So it's rather better to set it right. What you say, you were talking about pauses last time, and
Yes.
talking about word selection of words, and how do you remember, okay, how cognition process goes, by the way.
Yes.
When you understand how to recall, then you understand how do people recall. Then you were
Yes.
talking about critical analysis of that. Be critical in that. If at all you speak this way or that way, there is a possibility that things may go wrong, may go right. No, that's the go right is good, and the go wrong is very bad. So
Yes, sir. And also because somewhere cognition and EQ, emotional intelligence, are related. A lot of people say that we have this divide in learning, where in even in the social sciences and the physical sciences, where there is a kind of a binary. People say that either you can be emotional or you can be rational. So emotional is understood by emotional intelligence, or rational is understood by cognition. But I always say that the brain is not structured this way. The brain is structured in such a way where we need to be rational, use our cognitive faculty, and have empathy and emotional intelligence. So the two of them are related. And ultimately, if we can't think, for example, even empathy has that component. If we can't think cognitively, we can't emote properly. And if we don't, again, if we can't emote properly, there is no point in thinking, because the thinking is just relevant for us, not for the other person. So actually, if you see, there is if I could draw a triangle and say that there is emotional intelligence, there is, or empathy, there is cognition, and there is communication, and all three of them are linked for our well-being and for the other person's well-being. So we need to understand these three.
Sir, your mic is muted. Mandal, sir, your mic is muted.
Yes, sir.
So, if you have time to can throw light on dyslexia.
Yes, sure, surely, sir. I can,
It,
I
learning.
can, surely. Dyslexia is sort of a reading disorder, right? And when a child is dyslexic, there are multiple symptoms for dyslexia. One of the common symptoms of dyslexia is uh, not being able to read the alphabet correctly, reading the letters incorrectly, right? That's one of the common symptoms. But apart from this, there are many other symptoms of dyslexia, right? People have problems in speaking, right? People have problems in repetition. There can also be stuttering involved in it. So there can be multiple reasons. One of the things that's very commonly linked to dyslexia is something which we call technically as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That means children who are dyslexic, if we draw a correlation, right, this has been measured scientifically in through research, but also we can see it through common perception, that children who are dyslexic will be a little fidgety, will have shorter attention spans, will be a little distracted, right? And often, many a times, I've heard parents who will say, my child cannot write spelling, so he or she is dyslexic. No, your child is not dyslexic. Your child is just has a lesser attention span. Dyslexia is a serious disorder, right? But dyslexics can be helped in the long run. Dyslexics can be helped, and there are some techniques and tools that I can tell you. Cognitively, yes, there are some parts of the brain in dyslexia that are a little depressed, used less proficiently, right? Particularly the frontal lobe that I talked about. But dyslexics can be helped with things like writing big letters on the blackboard, Okay, using repetition of instruction, and repetition of instruction slowly so that the dyslexic child understands, right? Also, not bombarding the child with too much homework, too much information. Spacing it out gradually for a dyslexic child is also again very important. Okay, another thing that's very important, again, why I was trying to point out, and I just said this, that there is if I could have drawn a triangle between communication, cognition, empathy, or EQ. Was, take the example of dyslexia. Dyslexic students are not like normal children, right? And somewhere or the other, they will feel that inadequacy. So as teachers, we go back to the triangle. We need to be empathetic to the dyslexic student. Understand that they are facing a problem. We need to be patient with the dyslexic child. They will repeat the same thing again and again and again, and it can get exasperating for you. But we cannot get exasperated with such a child, right? We need to know cognitively what is dyslexia, what are the symptoms of dyslexia, and then we can communicate with the child, right? So that's why there is a very strong link. So that's the bit on dyslexia.
मैडम डिसलेक्सिया इज एड्रेसिंग द तारे जमीन पर फिल्म में आर्टिस्ट हुआ था, अच्छा हुआ था.
हाँ सर, वो that was nice, but that was a very, again, what I talked about in the presentation, that's a very prototypical representation of dyslexia. Dyslexia is that, right? But there is much more to dyslexia apart from that. There in that film, they're just given one aspect of dyslexia and discussed it. But dyslexics face many other problems. They face problems in listening, they face problems in writing, right? They face problems in reading, many other issues. So it's a serious thing, as you know, and that's why we should have special educators for dyslexics.
Madam, some people, instead of, when you read a spelling, you remember a spelling, instead of one word they're writing, they change it, So my son is also doing the same thing. So I don't know what to do with. Can you have some idea about that? No, he reads the spelling, he understands the spelling, he speaks that spelling, but when he writes R12, L2R, and something like that.
No, then sir, it's not dyslexia. Then I think it's just a little bit of lack of attention, being a little naughty is how I'll put it. You know why? Because in dyslexia, there will be problems in reading, right? There will be problems in writing. There will also be some problems in the comprehension. They will have, they will tend to look at read the word differently, understand the word slightly differently. They will also reproduce the spelling incorrectly.
That's spelling incorrectly. Spelling incorrectly.
Only spelling incorrectly, sir. The other aspects are fine. What I'm saying is dyslexia is interconnected. All the aspects are interconnected. So there will be problems in all the others also.
Okay. Thank you so much, madam. Yeah.
Sir,
Dr. has some question.
Yes.
Good afternoon, madam.
Yes.
Madam, we might have heard about subconscious state, unconscious state,
Yes,
and conscious state, madam.
Yes, sir.
Age means, does age matter or situations affect that part, madam? Can you elaborate?
The subconscious, unconscious, and the conscious, right? Age matters. Yes, I agree. Age matters. But the thing is, this requires again both emotional intelligence and both cognition to understand. I'll give you a small example. Many times when we dream, all of us, when we sleep, many of us get dreams, and most of the dreams are irrelevant dreams, right? That is when your subconscious is being processed. That's there in your subconscious. You're not doing it consciously because you're sleeping, right? Consciously, what we think, what we talk about, what we believe in, right? How we communicate is our conscious behavior, right? But one small link, okay, between the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious is this: there might be something in our experience, something emotional, something in terms of our thinking, something, right, which we don't like, okay, and that gets moved because we don't like it, or it's threatening to our self-esteem, right? That gets moved to the unconscious. And our job as educators, for ourselves and for others, for students also, should be to bring that information from the unconscious to the subconscious to the conscious, so that the person accepts the reality, so that they are it's good for their cognitive, for their emotional well-being. So that's one way of understanding the connection between the three.
Thank you so much, madam.
Yes. There is one more question here, and the question is about the layers of memory. And there's another one. With age, we tend to lose our memory in cases. Any ways of improving them? Yes, there are particular ways of improving memory. One is through the use of language, keeping yourself abreast with whatever is happening, in, let's say, in terms of vocabulary, learning new words in the language, solving puzzles in the language. The other is by developing our, or our mathematical knowledge. In terms of, you would have heard things like, some people play Sudoku puzzles and things like that. That's another one. Okay. But the third one is neither language nor mathematics. The third one is mindfulness. The more you keep your mind silently centered for 10 minutes, 15 minutes in a day, quietly in one place, so the more the mind's connections are rewired. And there is actually research to prove this. There is lots and lots of research. You can go in the internet and search, on Google Scholar, on anything on mindfulness, meditation, research on that. Okay. It's a new area, but the brain is rewired. Structures in the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe are completely rewired. Right? It gives us resilience. I'm sure there was a topic here on emotional intelligence. One of the topics was resilience, right? Mindfulness gives us resilience to think, resilience to live, resilience to overcome failure, which is very, very important. So that is one of the ways of improving our memory. All this, language helps us to improve, maths helps us to improve, so does mindfulness. And there are layers to memory. There was this one question, layers to memory. I explained layers in terms of, short-term and long-term memory, in terms of encyclopedic knowledge and, or learning skills. But if the writer, the person who's written this in the chat box, could be specific about the question, maybe I could explain more what it was that they wanted to know. So your mic is muted.
Ma'am, is that okay? Shall we close it? Any questions from any participants?
No, sir.
Okay, sir. No. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You have something to speak. Susma, ma'am?
No, sir. No.
Thank you. So, thank you so much, madam, for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for delivering a good explanation. No, I think that there must not be any question, because I don't think that I do have any questions. Because I understood everything. You taught us everything perfectly, and that is insightful. And I'm thankful and hopeful at the same time. The forthcoming events, I hope, may not be here, maybe somewhere else. Forthcoming events, I request you to come and join. Okay.
Sure, sir.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
It's a wonderful discussion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll be catching up by 2 o'clock today with M. Srinivas Rao. All of you, please participate. And madam, if you can join at, because we are closing at around 3:30. So if you can at 3:20 or something like that, I would be.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir.